They thought she was weak, they thought she had nothing, but in reality she was the only one holding the winning hand. As secrets unfold and power shifts, every move becomes calculated, every silence intentional. This story is a masterclass in patience, control, and timing, where the underestimated player turns the entire game around. Because true power doesn't reveal itself early, it waits until it's unstoppable.
Preston Carter strolled into New York City's most lavish diamond gala with his 26-year-old girlfriend wrapped around his arm. A smug grin was plastered on his face, one that seemed to steal the very oxygen from the air. Miles away, in their enormous house, he had left his pregnant wife behind with a final, cutting remark. He had called her a whale, then told her to go dust the library and not to stay up for him. He was completely clueless that the $5,000 ticket in his breast pocket was not a stroke of good luck. It was the bait on a perfectly laid trap. He had no inkling that every cent in his bank account, every business victory he toasted, and every expensive suit he wore was thanks to one person. That person was the woman he just insulted, who was now weeping over a cold holiday dinner for one. She was the woman whose pregnant stomach he had refused to even touch. She was the woman he had skillfully convinced was completely worthless. But here's the secret Preston never knew. His quiet, overlooked, and supposedly defeated wife was the owner of the very hotel he was standing in. She also owned the bank that held his mortgage. In fact, she owned his entire company through 12 different secret corporations. And on this night, in front of 500 of America's most influential people, she was preparing to emerge from the shadows. She would be wearing a $12 million sapphire necklace, and she was ready to set his entire world on fire. But this story is about so much more than simple revenge. The real battle started after the gala ended, the public turned on her, his lawyer tried to use her own baby against her, and then, at 3 a.m, Preston appeared on her doorstep himself. This story will make you rethink everything you believe about silence, power, and the will to survive. It is proof that the strongest woman in the room is not always the one making the most noise. It is often the one who has been silent for 5 years and has finally decided she is done playing a part. Before we dive in, let me be clear about what this story is truly about. It is not about money, and it is not about getting even. It is about a woman who was told for 5 long years that she was nothing. She slowly began to believe it until the day she decided to stop. If you have ever stayed in a relationship that made you feel small, or if you were ever too scared to leave because you thought you had nowhere to go, then this story is for you. Your silence is not a weakness. Your patience is not a flaw. And your comeback story does not need $1 billion. It just needs you to make a single choice. Preston Carter entered the Diamond Gala. He had a woman on his arm who was not his wife, and a look on his face that outshone the massive chandelier hanging above them. He adjusted his custom tuxedo, a suit that cost more than what most people pay for a year of rent. He leaned close and whispered to the blonde woman next to him, "This is the big leagues, babe. Just follow my lead and try to look like you belong here." Tiffany Blake, who was 26 years old, was poured into a knockoff red designer dress. It was so tight it looked as if it had been painted directly onto her body. She let out a little squeal of excitement that startled 3 wealthy women standing nearby. "Oh my gosh, Preston, is that the mayor?" On that night, Preston Carter felt absolutely invincible. He believed he had clawed his way up from the bottom to the very top of his industry. He was convinced it was all due to his own genius and hard work. He thought the invitation in his pocket was the world's way of finally acknowledging his greatness. He was wrong about every single thing. That invitation was not a prize. It was a leash. And the woman he left behind at home, 7 months pregnant, and crying over a holiday meal he had skipped, she was not the weak person he had made her out to be. She was not the simple homemaker he had spent 5 years carefully molding her into. The reality was she owned the very hotel where he was now standing. She owned the bank that held the mortgage to his home. She owned every last cent of his investment company, which was buried under a complex web of shell corporations. The entire structure was so brilliantly complicated it would take a team of elite accountants 3 months to figure it out. And she had already hired that team. But before we get to the conclusion, you have to understand his real crime. because what Preston Carter did to his pregnant wife was so much worse than just cheating on her. It was more than just being cruel. It was a slow, quiet war. He waged against a woman whose only fault was wanting to be loved for herself. And that woman, her name was Vivian. And tonight she was completely done pretending. To understand how Vivian Sinclair ended up scrubbing pots in a giant Connecticut mansion while secretly managing a global empire from a hidden phone in her laundry room, we have to go back 6 years. We have to go to a small diner in Dayton, Ohio. A 28-year-old woman was sitting alone in a booth with cracked vinyl seats, wearing her late father's flannel shirt. She was just staring into a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours before. Her father, Henry Sinclair, had been buried just the day before. To everyone else in Dayton, Henry was just a mechanic, but he was a fantastic one. He was the type of man who could diagnose a car's problem just from the sound of its engine. He would never charge a widow the full price for a repair. He always had a bit of grease under his fingernails and a laugh that could fill up a room. He had raised Vivian on his own after her mother passed away when Vivian was only 12. What the town of Dayton did not know was that Henry Sinclair had also invented a revolutionary fuel component back in the late 1970s. It completely transformed how car engines functioned. He patented it quietly and licensed it to dozens of companies. By the time he died from a heart attack at 61, that tiny part was inside nearly 60% of every engine on the planet. Henry left Vivian an incredible fortune. It was $4.3 billion, overseen by a firm called the Aurora Group. It was managed by a man named Benedict Ashford, the chief executive officer of the most exclusive private bank in London. As Vivian sat in that diner the day after the funeral, her phone buzzed. It was the attorney for her ex-fiancé. This was the man who had stolen $2 million from her personal bank account before fleeing to Costa Rica 6 months earlier. He had vanished right after discovering the true extent of her wealth. The lawyer's voice was smooth and sounded rehearsed. "Miss Sinclair," he said, "my client believes it is in everyone's best interest to avoid a difficult legal battle. He proposes we resolve this matter privately." Vivian simply ended the call. She did not say a word. She looked at her own reflection in the diner's dark window. Rain was streaking down the glass, distorting her face until she looked like a stranger. She saw a woman who had been betrayed by the first man she had truly loved. Her father was gone, her mother was a distant memory, and her money had become a terrible weight. It turned every new relationship into what felt like a business deal. She picked up her phone and dialed Benedict Ashford. "Benedict," she said. Her voice was perfectly steady, even though tear tracks were still drying on her face. "I want to disappear. I need a new identity. I will manage everything remotely from now on. As of today, Vivian Sinclair no longer exists." There was a long silence on the other end of the phone. "And who, madam?" Benedict finally asked, "will be taking her place?" "No one," she replied. "Just an ordinary woman." She wanted to find a man who could love her without knowing about the fortune attached to her name. So that evening, she called her grandmother. Gloria Sinclair was 72 years old, with a mind as sharp as a tack and a tongue that was twice as sharp. She still lived in the same Dayton house where she had raised Vivian's father, Henry. Gloria was the only other person on the planet who knew the full story of what Vivian was planning to do. "Grandma," Vivian began, "I am going to find someone who loves me for me when I have nothing to offer. I am going to live like a regular person for a while and find out if real love actually exists." Gloria was quiet for a few moments. Then she spoke the words that Vivian would carry with her for the next 6 years, feeling their weight in her pocket like a smooth, heavy stone. "Sweetheart," she said, "if you really want to know a man's true character, do not watch how he treats you when you are at your best. Watch how he treats you when you are at your worst. That is the only test that truly counts." So Vivian packed a few bags and moved to Westport, Connecticut. She rented a small apartment located just above a little bakery. She took a job as a waitress in a diner that she secretly owned through 3 different corporations. She filled her closet with jeans from the sales rack and drove an old Honda Civic with a large, unmistakable dent in the rear bumper. And that is how Vivian came to know Preston. He was unbelievably charming. In fact, he was the most charming man she had ever met in her entire life. He had this incredible way of looking at someone, making them feel like they were the only person in the world. Every word she spoke seemed to be the most captivating thing he had ever heard. He behaved like a perfect gentleman in every way. He always made sure to hold the door open for her. At restaurants, he would gently pull out her chair. He even remembered that she liked her coffee with oat milk and only one sugar. A fresh cup would be waiting for her when she arrived at the small coffee shop where they met for their next few dates. During their third date, while walking past a market, an older woman in front of them dropped two large paper bags. Her groceries spilled everywhere. Cans rolled into the street, and the poor woman looked like she was on the verge of tears. Without a moment's hesitation, Preston rushed over to help her. He picked up every last can and carried both of her heavy bags all the way to her car. The woman tried to hand him a $5 bill, but he just smiled and kindly refused. He returned to Vivian's side with a gentle smile. "I'm sorry about that," he said. "I just could not see her struggling and do nothing." In that single moment, Vivian knew she was falling deeply in love. It was not just his actions, but how natural his kindness seemed. It felt like goodness was an essential part of who he was. She would think about that moment thousands of times over the next 5 years. She would struggle to understand how that kind man could turn into the person who called his own pregnant wife a whale. They were married 18 months after they met. Vivian had told Preston she had a small inheritance from her father, enough to make a down payment on a house. The reality was that she purchased the entire home with cash using one of her shell companies. She then invented a fake mortgage so Preston would believe he was paying for it with money from his company, Carter Ventures. The company was his entire world. It was his proof that he was a powerful and important man. Preston never found out that every client, every investor, and every major contract his company secured was secretly directed to him by her own company, the Aurora Group. It all flowed through a complex web of corporations with names like Nebula Holdings and Orion Acquisitions. Vivian was his only investor. Vivian was his only client. She was the only source of all his income. She did this not because she wanted to control him, but because she loved him. She wanted him to feel successful and confident. She wanted the man she married to believe he was on top of the world. She just never thought he would build his kingdom by crushing her spirit. A person does not transform into a monster in a single day. It is a slow and quiet change. Abuse is not a sudden event that shatters your life. It is more like the slow wearing away of a stone by water. It happens so gradually that you do not see the canyon being formed until you can no longer remember what the landscape used to look like. The first year of their marriage was like a beautiful dream. Preston brought her a bouquet of flowers every single Friday, without exception. He cooked her dinner every Sunday. He would call her my girl, and when he said it, her heart would melt. In the beginning, that wonderful feeling was all that mattered. He would wrap his arms around her from behind as she washed dishes, kiss her neck, and whisper, "How did I ever get so lucky?" In the second year, the first small crack appeared in their perfect life. They were preparing to go to a dinner party when Vivian came downstairs wearing a new blue dress. Preston just looked at her for a long, quiet moment. A cold expression crossed his face. He said, "Are you really wearing that? It is a little plain, is not it? You should wear something with more style. You have been looking a bit soft lately." She returned upstairs and put on a different dress. She convinced herself it was not important. After all, partners are supposed to give each other their opinions. It is a completely normal part of a relationship. It can even be healthy. But by their third year together, his opinions were constant. He no longer said please. He stopped saying thank you. The Friday flowers and Sunday dinners were a distant memory. He started referring to their home as my house, and their car as my car, even though Vivian's money had paid for everything. He would say things like, "You do not bring anything of value to this relationship, Vivian. You work part-time as a waitress and waste your time around the house all day. I am the one building a real future for us. I have the vision. You should just feel lucky that I let you stay here." By the fourth year, his cruelty was an expected part of her day. It was just who he was. He would arrive home late in the evening smelling of expensive perfume she did not own. When she asked him where he had been, he would look at her with such complete disgust that she felt herself shrink. "I was at work, Vivian. I was working on projects you could never understand because you have never built anything of importance in your life. Now go and make me something to eat. I am starving." She knew she had the power to leave. At any time, she could go to the laundry room, retrieve the hidden, encrypted phone from the bottom of the hamper, and place a single call to her assistant, Benedict. Preston would be gone from her life. He would be removed with the same clean and quiet precision a surgeon uses to remove a tumor. Vivian possessed the money, the legal team, and all the power. But she also possessed hope, that foolish, stubborn, and incredibly destructive emotion. She kept waiting for the man she fell in love with to return. The man who had helped the old woman with her groceries. The man who used to call her my girl. She kept giving him another chance, and then one more, and then another one after that. There is a secret about relationships like these that no one ever shares. The person who stays is never weak. Staying requires a tremendous amount of strength. It is simply the wrong application of strength, a force turned inward on yourself, slowly destroying your own spirit from the inside out. The most courageous thing Vivian Sinclair ever did was not building a billion-dollar company from the ground up. It was waking up each morning next to a man who made her feel completely worthless and still finding the strength to get out of bed. In the 5th year, he hired Tiffany Blake. Tiffany was 26 years old, blonde, and desperate for success. She had a communications degree from a state university and a special ability to tell powerful men exactly what they wanted to hear. Preston hired her as his executive assistant. She began her job at Carter Ventures, and within 3 months, she was managing his personal calls, picking up his dry cleaning, and meeting him at a luxury hotel every Tuesday afternoon. He told Vivian he was in board meetings. Vivian was aware of everything, of course. She had access to every financial statement, every credit card receipt, and every location record from his car's GPS. She saw the charges from the hotel appear on the company credit card. She saw the receipts from expensive jewelry stores. She watched as a $12,500 diamond necklace from Cartier was recorded in the company's accounting system as computer hardware. She observed it all as her heart broke in slow motion. It broke so slowly and so completely that when there was nothing left to break, she barely noticed the silence where love had once been. Then, 3 months into the affair, Vivian discovered she was pregnant. She shared the news with Preston that evening at dinner. She had prepared his favorite meal, set the table with candles, and placed the ultrasound photo in a small envelope next to his plate. Preston opened it. He stared at the picture for a very long time, and then he looked up at Vivian. For one fleeting, hopeless moment, she thought she saw a flicker of the man she married in his eyes. "A baby," he murmured, his voice surprisingly soft. "A girl," Vivian whispered back, her heart aching with hope. "We are going to have a daughter." Preston set the photograph down on the table. He then picked up his fork, took a bite of his steak, and without a second glance in her direction, he spoke. "Well, I hope she gets your looks. My genes would be wasted on someone who is just going to end up a housewife anyway." He went upstairs the moment he finished his meal. He did not mention the baby again for 3 long weeks. But Vivian remained at that table long after the candles had melted into puddles of wax. With a protective hand on her stomach, she made a decision that changed everything. She was no longer staying for Preston. She was no longer hoping for him to change. She was done with hope. Now she was making a plan. She retrieved the encrypted phone from its hiding spot and called Benedict. "The Gala," she said, her voice firm. "When is the Diamond Gala this year?" "December 14th, madam. The invitations were sent out last week." "Send one to Preston," she instructed. "And make sure it looks like it came from the official committee. I want a VIP table reserved for him, right near the front." Benedict hesitated on the other end of the line. "And the board presentation, madam?" "Move the meeting to that very same night," she said. "I want the full financial investigation completed and ready to present. I want Henderson and the entire legal team there." "Madam," Benedict said, choosing his words with great care, "are you completely certain about this course of action?" Vivian looked down at the ultrasound photo. It was still lying on the table next to Preston's barely touched plate and the hardened wax from the candles. "I am certain," she confirmed, "my daughter will not be born into a world that is built on lies." The weeks leading up to the gala were supposed to be a countdown to a brand new life. Instead, they turned into the most challenging weeks Vivian had ever endured. It all began on Thanksgiving. Vivian, now 6 months pregnant, woke up at 5 in the morning. She spent the entire day cooking an enormous feast. She roasted a turkey with a savory sage stuffing, made cranberry sauce from scratch, and baked a green bean casserole. She even prepared a sweet potato pie using Preston's mother's special recipe. It was the one he had told her about on their second date, the one he said always made him think of his childhood. She set the dining table with their finest china, lit candles, and put on her best maternity dress. It was a soft green dress that made her feel almost beautiful, despite the heavy burden of her pregnancy and 5 years of feeling invisible. She even poured Preston's favorite bourbon into a crystal glass with a single large ice cube, just the way he liked it. Preston finally came home at 9:15 that night. By then, the turkey was cold. The candles were just smoldering stubs, and the ice cube had dissolved into a watery pool. He walked into the dining room, looked at the magnificent meal she had prepared, and wrinkled his nose as if something smelled awful. "I already ate," he announced. "The team took me to Nobu. You know I cannot eat all this heavy food, Vivian. It is so unsophisticated." Vivian's hands began to tremble, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "I made your mother's sweet potato pie. You told me it was your favorite." Preston loosened his tie with a sharp tug. "That was before I knew what real food tasted like, Vivian. Get rid of all of this. And clean up. The whole house smells like a high school cafeteria." He walked up the stairs without a single glance at her pregnant stomach, without one question about their child, and without wishing her a happy Thanksgiving. Vivian sat down at the perfectly arranged empty table. She picked up a fork and ate her Thanksgiving meal all by herself, while her tears dripped onto the pie she had spent 3 hours creating for him from memory. That night, she could not bear the thought of lying in the same bed with him. Instead, Vivian curled up on the living room sofa and called her best friend, Ruth Washington. They had known each other since freshman year of college. Ruth was a pediatric nurse in Bridgeport and was known for telling the truth, no matter how harsh. "Viv, you have to leave him. Tonight," Ruth insisted. "Just pack a bag and come over to my place. I will make up the guest room for you. I am 7 months pregnant, Ruth. It is not that easy. You have $1 billion, Vivian. You can do anything you want." "That is not what this is about," she whispered into the phone. "I needed this to feel real. I wanted to believe he loved me for who I am. If I reveal who I am now, I will never truly know." "Know what, though?" Ruth's voice was sharp with frustration. "He treats you like you are worthless. That is the only thing you need to know. The experiment is over, Viv, and he has failed. Please just listen to me." When someone shows you who they really are, you have to believe them. You have already given him 5 years of second chances. This is not about love, honey. You are a prisoner. Vivian squeezed her eyes shut tightly. "Not yet. The big gala is in 2 weeks. I have a plan. After the gala, it will all be finished." "I promise," Vivian said softly. Ruth was quiet for a long time on the other end of the phone. Then she spoke in a low, serious tone. "Vivian Sinclair, I swear on my life, if that man ever harms you or that baby, I will personally burn his entire world to the ground. And I do not need $1 billion to do it." A week before the gala, Vivian had her final prenatal appointment. This would be the last ultrasound before her daughter's birth. This baby was conceived in a moment that Vivian had desperately wanted to believe was special. She had asked Preston to come with her. "I have a meeting," Preston had said without looking up from his phone. "A real one, with people who actually matter." So Vivian went by herself. The doctor, a kind woman named Dr. Patterson, performed the ultrasound. The baby was perfectly healthy. She had a strong, consistent heartbeat and was in the perfect position for birth. Everything on the screen looked wonderful, a painful contrast to how broken her own life felt. Then Dr. Patterson's warm expression changed slightly. "Mrs. Carter, your blood pressure is a little high. Have you been under any unusual stress lately?" In that moment, something deep inside of Vivian finally broke. It was not a loud, dramatic shatter, but a quiet, splintering crack like a tree branch finally breaking under the weight of too much ice. She began to cry, and once the tears started, they would not stop. They just poured down her cheeks in silent streams. She just sat there on the examination table, in a thin paper gown, with cold ultrasound gel on her belly, and she wept. Dr. Patterson simply took her hand and waited with gentle patience. After the worst of the sobbing had passed, the doctor asked, in a soft voice, "Vivian, I need to ask you something very important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is everything okay at home?" Vivian opened her mouth, ready to let all the truth pour out. The words were right there on the tip of her tongue, aching to be released. But after 5 years of living a lie, silence had become a powerful habit. "I am fine," she lied. "It is just the pregnancy hormones." She left the clinic and walked through the rainy parking lot to her old, dented Honda Civic. And that is when she saw it. Preston's shiny silver Mercedes was parked across the street, directly in front of the Cheesecake Factory. She could see him perfectly through the big front window, surrounded by the restaurant's warm lights. He was sitting in a comfortable booth with Tiffany Blake. Tiffany was laughing at something he had just said. Then, Preston reached across the table and gently fed her a bite of cheesecake from his own fork. His hand then moved down to rest on Tiffany's stomach. He rubbed it with a soft tenderness, the exact way a man touches the woman carrying his child. Tiffany was also pregnant. Vivian stood frozen in the downpour, 7 months pregnant and completely alone, watching her husband cradle another woman's belly. This was happening in the same restaurant where he had proposed to her 3 years ago. He had knelt on one knee right there, between the dessert display and the hostess station, and told her she was the only woman he could ever see a future with. In 7 months, he had never once touched Vivian's pregnant stomach. She had tried to get him to feel their baby kick, but he always dismissed her, claiming he was too busy. Her mother's words from a phone call last week echoed in her mind. "You are going to burn his entire castle to the ground, and then you are coming home to me. We're going to raise my granddaughter with so much love that she will never know what it feels like to be cold. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am," Vivian had whispered. "And sweetheart," her mother had added, "wear the blue dress. The one with the diamonds? Let that man see exactly what a real queen looks like." The night before the gala, Preston came home drunk around midnight. Vivian was in bed, propped up on pillows because sleeping on her back was no longer possible. She was looking at a book of baby names and had just circled the name Eleanor. Preston stood in the doorway, just staring. The look of pure disgust on his face was so powerful that Vivian flinched, as if he had actually hit her. "God, Vivian, you look like a whale," he sneered. "I cannot even stand to look at you anymore." "I am carrying your daughter, Preston." "Are you even sure she is mine?" he retorted. "Let's be practical here, Vivian. I have not been intimate with you in months. Who knows what you do all day while I am at work?" The accusation was so incredibly cruel, so perfectly engineered to cause pain, that it took her breath away. The man who spent every Tuesday afternoon with his mistress was now accusing his faithful, pregnant wife of cheating. He then sat on the edge of the bed to remove his shoes and said the words she had been dreading for months. "After the baby is born, we need to have a serious conversation about our future. I have been thinking a lot. I want a different kind of life. The company is making some big moves, and I believe I need to change my personal life as well." He was actually telling her his plan. He was going to leave her as soon as the baby was born, as soon as she had fulfilled her purpose. "Where would I go, Preston?" Vivian asked, making her voice sound small and weak. "I have nothing. You control all the finances." Preston smirked, his perfect teeth shining in the dim light of the bedroom. "That is correct, so maybe you should try to be a little more appreciative." 4 minutes later, he was fast asleep. Vivian stayed awake until the first light of dawn, her hand resting on her stomach, feeling her daughter kick against her palm. She whispered into the silent room, "Tomorrow, my sweet girl. Tomorrow, Mommy is finished pretending." At 2:54 in the morning, Vivian's life was hit by 3 disasters in a row. The first was a phone call that woke her from a deep sleep. It was Benedict, her most trusted advisor, and his voice was tense. He said, "Madam, we have a major problem." He explained that a member of the board leaked a critical piece of information to the press. A newspaper now knew that the true owner of the Aurora Group would be revealed at the gala tonight. If that story broke early, her husband Preston would surely get scared and try to disappear or destroy evidence. The second disaster came from her best friend Ruth. She called and said, "Viv, you are not going to believe this. Tiffany Blake is at the salon telling everyone that Preston is divorcing you on Monday. His lawyer says you will walk away with absolutely nothing because you are just a housewife with no job." The third call was from her lawyer. He said, Mrs. Carter, someone took out a loan against your house for $500,000 yesterday. The signature on the loan was her name, but an expert had already confirmed it was a fake. Her own husband had forged her signature to get the money. He then used that cash to buy a condo for his mistress, Tiffany Blake. In less than 45 minutes, her entire world was under attack. Can a woman everyone dismissed as a simple homemaker fight back and win? Stay with us to see how she gets the most perfect revenge. The leak to the press threatened to destroy everything she had planned. The big reveal she had orchestrated for tonight was about to be spoiled. The divorce papers proved Preston was already making his move to leave her financially ruined. He had no idea about the massive fortune she secretly controlled. And the forged loan was a serious crime. If that information came out at the wrong time, it would blow her cover before she was ready to make her move. Vivian sat quietly on the bed as Preston showered. She could hear him singing a cheerful pop song about living his best life. His voice, so full of joy and confidence, carried right through the bathroom door. He was getting ready for what he believed would be the biggest night of his career. He did not know that the woman sitting only 15 feet away was the true owner of the very water he was washing with. She picked up her phone and called Benedict back. "You need to kill that story," she ordered. "I do not care what it costs. Promise the reporter an exclusive interview with me after the event. Do whatever it takes, but that news story cannot be published before I am on that stage." Benedict's reply was simple. "Consider it done." Vivian then asked, "And the forgery?" She told him, "Put it in Henderson's file on page 4. She hung up and then immediately called Ruth. Vivian told her, "I need you at the gala tonight, and I need you to be more than just my friend. I need you inside that ballroom, sitting at a table near the back exit. If anything goes wrong, you are the one person I can trust who is not on my payroll." Ruth did not hesitate. "I will be there," she said. Then she added, "And Viv, no matter what happens, I want you to know that I am so proud of you." Just then, Preston stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in a cloud of steam and smelling of expensive cologne. He stood in front of the mirror, admiring his reflection while he fixed his tuxedo. He even practiced his smile, tilting his head to find his best angle. He did not look at Vivian once. "Vivian," he said, still staring at himself, "where are my good cufflinks? The black ones." "They are on your dresser, right where you left them," she answered. He grabbed them and then checked the expensive Rolex on his wrist. It was a present from Vivian for their 5th anniversary, but he told all his friends he bought it himself with a bonus from work. "I will be home very late tonight," he announced. "Do not wait up. And tell the cleaning lady to dust the library properly. I found a fingerprint on my desk today." He picked up his coat and walked out. He did not say goodbye. He did not look her way. And he never once glanced at her belly, where his own daughter was quietly growing. The front door slammed shut with such force that it made the pictures on the hallway walls shake. The silence that followed felt heavy and suffocating, like being on a ship as it slowly sinks to the bottom of the ocean. Vivian stood up. She untied the plain apron she was wearing and let it drop to the floor. She removed the simple band from her hair, and her long, dark hair fell down her back. She walked to a locked door at the very end of the hall. Preston thought this room was just for storing old furniture. She entered a security code on a keypad, and the lock clicked open. The room was not for storage. It was a high-tech control center. 3 large computer screens glowed, displaying financial market data that changed every second. A secure phone line sat on the large desk. An entire wall was filled with perfectly organized files. And, right in the middle of the room on a mannequin, protected by a garment bag, was her dress. It was made of silk the color of the midnight sky. Thousands of tiny, crushed diamonds had been sewn into the fabric by hand, and they sparkled in the dim light. The dress was designed to perfectly flatter her pregnant body. It flowed around her like dark water, making her look not just pregnant, but incredibly powerful. She looked like a beautiful storm on the horizon. Next to the dress was a jewelry box. Inside was the Sinclair blue, a stunning necklace with a huge sapphire surrounded by diamonds. It had been in her family for 3 generations. That single necklace was worth an incredible $12 million. Her father had always kept it hidden away in a bank vault. He once told her, "You will know when it is the right time to wear this." He said, "Wear it on the day you decide you are finished with letting other people make you feel small." She gently ran her finger over the sapphire, which felt cool to the touch. "I am done being small," she whispered into the silent room. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her grandmother, Gloria, and it included a picture. Gloria was standing in her kitchen in Ohio holding a heavy cast-iron skillet and smiling from ear to ear. The text said, "Just in case that husband of yours decides to cause trouble, Grandma is ready." For the first time that day, Vivian let out a real laugh. Ruth came over at 4 o'clock that afternoon. She brought a dress bag, a makeup kit she had borrowed from a friend in the theater, and 2 bottles of sparkling cider. Ruth said, "I was going to bring champagne for a proper celebration. But since you are pregnant, and I am driving, this is the next best thing. We can still make a toast to your husband's spectacular downfall." She helped Vivian arrange her hair in an elegant style that would perfectly display the Sinclair blue necklace. When Vivian opened the jewelry box, Ruth gasped. "Oh my goodness," she whispered. "Is that real?" Vivian smiled and said, "It is called the Sinclair blue." "It has been in my family since 1942, Vivian said. Ruth just stared at the sparkling diamonds. "I've been letting you borrow $20 for lunch for the last 5 years, Ruth said, her voice full of disbelief. $20, Vivian. I am sending you a bill for 5 years of emotional support plus a down payment for a beach house." Vivian laughed again, but this time it was a deep, happy laugh. The sound felt strange, like hearing from an old friend she had not seen in a long time. "Seriously, though," Ruth said, "can I just hold it for a minute? I want to feel what it is like to be rich." Vivian placed the heavy necklace in her hands. Ruth held it up to the light, closed her eyes, and stood perfectly still for 3 full seconds. She opened her eyes and let out a big sigh. "Nope, did not work. I still have student loans." After they were ready, Vivian made a video call to Gloria. She turned slowly in front of the camera so her grandmother could see her from every angle. The midnight blue dress draped perfectly over her baby bump. The tiny diamonds twinkled like stars in a night sky. The deep blue sapphire rested at her throat. Gloria was speechless for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Oh, my sweet girl. If your father was alive to see you right now, he would be crying with pride." Vivian confessed. "I am so scared, Grandma." Gloria's voice became strong and clear. "Good. Only brave people feel scared," her grandmother once told her. "Cowards are the ones who feel nothing at all. Now go put on your diamonds and show that man what a complete fool he has been." She then said, "And I want you to call me the moment it's over. It does not matter how late. This old woman will not sleep a single wink tonight." As Vivian got ready for the most important night of her life, Preston was already at the Archdale Hotel in Manhattan, happily digging his own grave. He showed up at 6:30, with Tiffany clutching his arm. She wore a bright red dress, a cheap copy of a famous designer gown he had charged to his company's expense account. Her brand new necklace sparkled on her neck, paid for with money meant for an orphanage but hidden as a computer purchase. Preston strolled into the lobby like he owned the entire building. A big security guard wearing an earpiece glanced at a tablet to check the guest list. He located Preston's name and stopped. A strange look appeared on the guard's face. It was a look that was almost like pity. "Right this way, Mr. Carter," he said. "Your table is located near the front." Preston smiled at Tiffany. "You see? Near the front. That is what real power gets you, honey." The ballroom looked like a palace. Giant crystal chandeliers dangled from the ceiling like sparkling jewels. Waiters in white gloves drifted quietly through the guests. The most powerful people in the city were all there, gathered in small circles. Their laughter was quiet and their jewelry was brilliant. Preston looked around the room hoping someone important would see him. He saw Grant Holloway, another investor who had beaten him in a business deal several months ago. Grant was chatting with a few older men wearing very expensive suits. "Grant, it is so great to see you," Preston said, shoving his way into their conversation like a loud, unwelcome noise. Grant turned to face him. His eyes narrowed just a little as he looked at Preston and then at Tiffany, who stood out like a warning sign. "Preston," Grant said coolly, "I'm a little surprised to find you here. This is a private event, by invitation only." "I have my connections," Preston lied without missing a beat. "This is Tiffany." Grant gave her a chilly nod and said, "A pleasure." But he did not really look at her. He then added, "We were just talking about the Aurora Group. Rumor has it the owner is finally going to make an appearance tonight." Preston laughed loudly. "The Aurora Group? Are you serious? It is probably some old man in a wheelchair who is hiding all his money in Switzerland. I heard that the entire company is just a scam to wash dirty money." A man with silver hair in the group turned his head slowly and stared right at Preston. His name was Lord Rothschild, and he was one of the 5 richest men in all of Europe. He was giving Preston the kind of look a person gives an insect just before stepping on it. "I would be very careful about what you assume, young man," Grant said in a calm voice. "The Aurora Group does not just own this hotel. They probably own the very bank that is funding your company." Preston just waved his hand as if he were shooing away a fly. "I know how money works, sir. I know a fake company when I see one. Aurora has no public face, and that means it has no real power." Grant just smiled and took a small sip of his champagne. "If that is what you think, Preston. By the way, where is your wonderful wife tonight? Her name was Vivian, right?" Preston rolled his eyes for everyone to see. "Oh, Vivian is at home. She is not really built for this kind of high-stakes environment. She is a sweet woman, but she is very simple. Her idea of a big night is a bottle of cheap wine from the grocery store. I'm sure you understand the type." Tiffany, who was next to him, giggled. "She sounds sweet, like a little country mouse." "Exactly," Preston said as he grabbed a fresh glass of champagne from a server walking by. "A mouse, but in my world, I need a lioness." He pulled Tiffany a bit closer to him and laughed at his own joke. He did not know that the quiet little mouse he had left behind at home was on her way to the ballroom, and she was about to eat him for dinner. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lights in the beautiful ballroom dimmed. The low hum of 500 separate conversations suddenly went silent, like a candle flame being blown out. A single spotlight hit the enormous staircase at the far end of the room. The light made the marble steps shine like a path to the sky. Or maybe it was a path to a very different place, depending on who you were. The host of the evening stepped up to the microphone. He was a famous actor with a voice as smooth as aged whiskey. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to the 50th Annual Diamond Gala. This night is very special. For a long time, the Aurora Group has done its work in secret, donating to hospitals, charities, and the arts. But tonight, the chairwoman has decided to reveal herself." Preston nudged Tiffany. "Get ready, it is going to be some really old woman. I will bet you $10. The announcer's voice boomed through the room once more. "Please give a warm welcome to the owner and chairwoman of the Aurora Group, Madame Vivian Sinclair." The champagne glass fell from Preston's hand and shattered on the marble floor. The sound was lost in a single, sharp gasp that spread through the entire crowd. Sinclair. That was Vivian's last name before she married him. But that was simply not possible. Her father had only been a mechanic. Preston had even met the man before he passed away. He could still picture the dark grease that was permanently stained beneath the man's fingernails. He remembered eating grilled food in the man's tiny backyard. The large double doors at the very top of the stairs swung open, and Vivian was standing there. She stood at the very top of the staircase, wearing a gown the color of a midnight blue sky. The dress flowed gently over her pregnant stomach like a soft waterfall at dusk. Thousands of tiny, crushed diamonds sewn into the fabric caught the spotlight and broke it into a million shimmering pieces. She looked as if she was glowing with a light from a different world. The Sinclair blue sapphire was around her neck, a $12 million jewel that seemed to beat with its own power. Her dark hair was styled in an elegant updo, showing the beautiful curve of her neck. Even at 7 months pregnant, she was the most powerful person in the room. She started to walk down the stairs. The click of her heels on the marble was slow and sure with every single step. She moved with the confidence of a woman who owned the very ground she was walking on, which, in this case, was the truth. The crowd parted for her. 500 of New York City's most powerful and wealthy people moved aside as if she were Moses parting the Red Sea. Vivian walked right through them, her gaze locked straight ahead. Her eyes were fixed on just one person. Preston. He was frozen at his table, his mouth hanging open. His face was changing emotions so quickly he looked like a broken slot machine. Tiffany suddenly understood what was going on and grabbed his arm in a panic. "Why does that woman look exactly like your wife, but like she is some kind of famous movie star?" Grant Holloway was standing nearby and heard what she said. A small, pleased smile formed on his face. "I do believe, Preston, that is the little mouse you mentioned you left at home." Vivian reached the bottom of the stairs and stopped about 10 feet away from Preston. 4 security guards formed a human wall around her. Benedict Ashford stood on her right, looking perfect in a dark gray suit. On her left was Marcus Henderson, the financial investigator, who was holding a leather folder that looked like it held a death sentence. Vivian's eyes met Preston's and a slow, cold smile spread across her lips. There was no warmth in it, and no forgiveness. It was the smile of a woman who would never be underestimated again. Someone handed her a microphone. Her voice filled the huge ballroom, powerful and clear. "Hello, everyone. I am so sorry I am late. I had to take out some trash before I could get here." Her gaze never moved from Preston. She then looked at Lord Rothschild. "Lord Rothschild, I want to apologize for any confusion with the Shanghai deal. Benedict has told me that all the paperwork is correct now." The old lord bowed his head with respect. "Please do not think anything of it, Madam Sinclair. Your strategy for the Asian market is brilliant. It is our privilege to follow your direction." Preston could only stare as one of the wealthiest men in Europe bowed to the woman he thought was just his simple wife. Something deep inside of him started to break. Vivian turned back to the microphone stand. Her face looked perfectly calm, but her friend Ruth, watching from the back, could see that her hands were shaking just a little. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivian began, "for the last 5 years, I have been performing a kind of social experiment. I wanted to see if a man could love a woman for who she is, and not for what she has. So I hid my real identity. I pretended to be a simple wife and mother. I let my husband take the lead." She pushed a button. The giant screen behind her lit up with a company chart. The Aurora Group was at the very top. Under it was a complicated web of smaller, fake companies. And at the very bottom of the chart, clinging on like a parasite, was Carter Ventures. My husband Preston thought he was a brilliant businessman who built his own company from nothing. The truth is, every single penny his company ever made came from me. I funneled all the money through these shell corporations. I was his only investor. I was his only client. I was his only source of cash. Preston leaped out of his chair. "That is a lie. I closed a deal in Tokyo last month. That was $2 million from real clients." Vivian calmly clicked the button again. A bank statement appeared on the giant screen. It showed that the Tokyo deal was funded by a company called Orion Acquisitions, which was one of hers. "You were in a meeting with my own lawyers, Preston. I hired actors to sit across the table from you. You were so busy admiring your expensive watch that you did not even realize they could not speak a word of English." The image on the screen changed again. It showed hotel bills from the St. Regis Hotel for every Tuesday afternoon. It showed a receipt for a Cartier necklace that had been disguised as an office expense for computer equipment. Then, a huge photo of Preston and Tiffany at Disney World appeared, both of them wearing Mickey Mouse ears. He had claimed that trip was for business in Chicago. Vivian left the Disney World picture on the screen for everyone to see. A wave of laughter crashed through the room, but it was cold and sharp. It was the sound of high society turning its back on one of its own. Henderson stepped forward, holding a stack of forged papers. "And this," Henderson announced to the guests, "is a loan for $500,000 against their house, taken out just yesterday." "He faked her signature," Henderson continued. "The money went to a condominium in Stamford, Connecticut, which is now registered to Miss Tiffany Blake." Henderson then turned his gaze directly to Tiffany. "That necklace you are wearing, Miss Blake? It was bought with a company credit card for a charity meant to feed orphans in Sudan. You are wearing the food budget for an entire village." Tiffany's hands shot up to the expensive jewelry. Her fingers fumbled with the clasp as she desperately tried to rip it from her throat. "Get it away from me! Take it off! He told me he was rich. He swore he made his own money." "Oh, he is a self-made man," Vivian said, her voice like ice. "He made himself a criminal." For the final crushing blow, Henderson raised an old, yellowed birth certificate. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man you know as Preston Carter was actually born Preston Allen Mallory in Trenton, New Jersey. He legally changed his name 4 years ago. Before that, he was a junior manager at a car rental company, where he was fired for renting cars to himself for weekend trips. The humiliation was absolute. The man with the borrowed clothes, a borrowed name, and a borrowed life had nowhere left to hide. From side doors, federal agents quietly entered the ballroom. "Preston Allen Mallory," the lead agent called out in a clear voice, "you are under arrest for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and embezzlement." As they secured his hands behind his back, Preston yelled across the room, "I loved you, Vivian, in my own strange way. I really did love you." Vivian did not yell back. She simply reached up and unfastened the breathtaking Sinclair blue diamond from around her neck. She held the massive sapphire high so everyone could watch it glitter in the light. "You did not love me, Preston. You loved the reflection of yourself that you saw in my money. But that mirror has now been shattered." The agents dragged him toward the doors. The heavy wooden doors slammed shut, silencing his desperate cries. The entire room erupted in applause. Vivian raised a simple glass of water. "To the future. May it be honest, may it be bright, and may it be ours." For the next 48 hours, Vivian Sinclair was the most talked about woman in the country. The video from the gala spread like a wildfire across the internet. Every news channel covered the story. "Billionaire wife exposes fake husband at charity gala." The clips of Preston's expression falling apart, as he understood his whole world was a lie, were viewed 200 million times in just 2 days. The photo of him in the Mickey Mouse ears became a famous internet meme. People began selling T-shirts with his picture on them. Someone even turned Henderson's financial takedown into a rap song that shot to the top of the comedy music charts. Vivian was finally back in her home in Greenwich. She sat on her sofa with her feet propped up. She had an ice pack on her swollen ankles and was watching the news with Ruth. For the first time in 5 long years, the house felt peaceful and still. It was not the tense silence of unspoken words, but the gentle quiet of real freedom. Ruth handed her a warm mug of herbal tea. "You did it, Viv. It is finally over. You actually did it." Vivian gently rested a hand on her pregnant belly. The baby kicked, a strong and steady movement, almost as if it were applauding for her too. "Yes," she whispered. "I guess I did." Just then, Ruth's phone made a sound. She looked down at the screen and her warm smile disappeared. All the color drained from her face. Ruth's voice came through the phone in a frantic whisper. "Viv, you have to see this!" It was a video, secretly filmed inside the county jail and already spreading like wildfire. The clip showed Tiffany Blake, dressed in a glaring orange jumpsuit, her face a mess of tear-streaked mascara. An unseen inmate was recording her on a smuggled phone. It was impossible to know if her tears were genuine, but it did not matter. The damage was instant and severe. "She destroyed my life," Tiffany cried to the hidden camera. "I am pregnant and I have nobody. Preston told me she was a monster. He said they were getting a divorce and even showed me the papers. Now I am locked in here all because a billionaire wanted to teach him a lesson." Her voice cracked with phony emotion. "She is no hero. She is just a rich woman who spent 5 years playing with our lives. She could have walked away any time." But she stayed, watching us all suffer, just so she could have her big public takedown. What about my child? Does my child not get a chance at life? In just 6 hours, the video exploded, hitting 14 million views. The entire story flipped on its head. In the blink of an eye, the woman everyone had been cheering for was now the villain. The internet headlines changed with a vicious speed. "Billionaire's revenge or billionaire's cruelty?" one asked. Another blared, "Pregnant mistress claims she was the real target." A third headline wondered aloud, "Did Vivian Sinclair go too far?" Soon the television talk shows were debating her every move. One commentator asked, "This woman is worth $4 billion. She paid for his entire fake lifestyle. How do we know she was not the one pulling all the strings?" A famous writer published an opinion piece titled, "The Problem with Rich People's Justice." The article argued that Vivian had treated real human beings like chess pieces for her own amusement. The comments online were absolutely heartless. One person wrote, "She could have just divorced him. Instead, she chose to humiliate him in front of 500 guests. That is not justice. That is a power trip." But then came the one comment that cut the deepest. What kind of mother would use her own pregnancy as a weapon in a public feud? Vivian sat on the edge of her bed, one hand resting on her stomach, as she scrolled through the venomous words. She felt the perfect world she had fought so hard to reclaim begin to shatter all over again. Finally, Ruth had to gently pull the phone from her hands. "Viv, you have to stop. These people do not know you. They have no idea what that man put you through." "But they are not wrong, Ruth," Vivian said, her voice a faint whisper, quieter than it ever was when Preston would scream in her face. "I did orchestrate the whole thing. I could have left 5 years ago." What kind of person stays in a miserable situation just to set a better trap? "The kind of person who is in love," Ruth answered softly. "The kind who hoped he might change and become a good man." "That is not a flaw, Vivian. That is being human." A few moments later, Gloria called from Ohio, and her voice was like a splash of cold, sensible water. "Sweetheart, since when do we give a darn what a bunch of strangers on the computer think about us? You know your own heart. God knows your heart. And that little baby inside you knows your heart. Everybody else can go take a long walk off a short pier." Then she said the exact words Vivian needed to hear. "Let me tell you something I learned the hard way. When you are fighting a monster, everyone cheers for you. But the second you win, they start whispering that maybe you fought a little too dirty. Do not you dare apologize for surviving. They have been telling women to say sorry for their own strength since the dawn of time. That foolishness stops with you." Vivian wiped the tears from her cheeks. "Okay, Grandma." But the wave of bad press was not the biggest problem. The real danger came 30 minutes later with a call from Benedict. He was using a serious tone she had only heard him use in a true emergency. "Madam, I'm going to need you to take a seat. Preston's new attorney, a man named Harlan Drake, has just filed 3 emergency motions. First, he is claiming you entrapped Preston. He plans to argue that you deliberately funded Preston's illegal activities to set him up, which could legally make you his partner in crime. Second, he has filed for custody. Preston is demanding sole custody of your unborn child on the grounds that you are psychologically unstable and used your pregnancy as a weapon for public humiliation. Third, he is filing a countersuit against you for $50 million. He is claiming you deceived him into marriage by hiding your true identity." Vivian felt as if all the warmth had vanished from her body. "He wants to take Eleanor. A family court judge has set a temporary hearing for next week. If Drake can prove you planned the crimes, the federal charges against Preston could be reduced. But more importantly, he could build a case to take your baby." The room began to spin. Vivian reached out, grabbing the side of the bed to steady herself. The baby gave a sharp, sudden kick inside of her as if she could feel her mother's rising panic. "He cannot take my daughter, Benedict. He cannot." "He will not," Benedict promised, his voice solid as a rock. "But we must be prepared. This is no longer about getting even, madam. This is about survival." For the next 3 days, Vivian went to what Ruth later called the dark place. She hardly ate. Sleep never came. She would just sit in the nursery, the one she had been quietly preparing for months. The walls were a soft yellow, the crib was a clean white, and a stuffed elephant sat in the corner. An impulse buy from a local farmer's market. It reminded her of an elephant her own father had bought her as a child. She would sit in the rocking chair for hours, holding her belly and whispering to her daughter, "I was supposed to protect you. I was supposed to be smarter, and now he might take you from me, all because my pride was too big to just walk away. I am so sorry, my sweet baby. I am so sorry." Ruth found her there on the third morning. She did not say a word at first, just sat on the floor with her back against the crib, sharing the heavy silence. After a long while, she finally spoke. "Stop." Vivian looked up at her, her eyes hollow. "Stop it right now," Ruth said firmly. "You are not going to lose this baby. Not while I am breathing. Not while Gloria is breathing. And certainly not while Benedict Ashford and his very proper, very British self are breathing. It is not happening. So stop mourning something that is not gone and start fighting. What proof do we have on our side?" Vivian just stared at her friend. And then, a flicker of something changed deep in her eyes. It was not the icy, strategic look she wore at the gala. This was something different, something warmer, and far more fierce. It was the fire of a mother protecting her child. She picked up the encrypted phone and called Benedict. Emergency meeting, the entire team, in 1 hour. They all gathered on a secure video conference. Benedict was in London. Henderson was in his simple office in Midtown. Vivian's legal team was in their conference room. And joining them was Detective Sarah Crawford from the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division. She had been secretly working on Vivian's case for 18 months. "The entrapment claim," Vivian said, her voice suddenly powerful. "It crumbles if we can show I was cooperating with the police from the start. Benedict, I need the full email correspondence with the FBI compiled and filed with the court immediately. Every message, every report, every single timestamp." Benedict nodded. "It is already underway, madam. We have 147 documented communications with the Bureau, dating back a year and a half." "You were not assisting in a crime. You were building a federal case under their direction." Detective Crawford spoke next. "I will confirm that under oath." Mrs. Carter, or I should say Mrs. Sinclair, was a cooperating informant. She came to us 18 months ago with evidence of financial misconduct in her husband's company. Our department instructed her to continue observing him while we built our legal case. Every step she took was authorized as a required part of our ongoing investigation. Vivian then moved to the next item on the agenda. "All right, what about the custody hearing? What do we need to do to make sure we win?" Her lawyer answered, "We need a powerful character witness, someone who can speak to your fitness as a mother and explain to the court why you had to keep your identity a secret. We need someone the judge will believe without a single doubt." Vivian thought about it for a second. And then, for the first time in 3 miserable days, a slow, determined smile spread across her face. "Book a plane ticket for my grandmother," she said. The hearing was held the following Thursday in a family courthouse in Stamford, Connecticut. The room was absolutely packed. Reporters swarmed the hallway outside. Preston appeared on a large video screen from the jail, looking small in his tan inmate uniform, while his lawyer, Harlan Drake, did all the talking. Vivian had to admit, Drake was skilled. He was a sharp man with silver hair who spoke in a calm, reasonable tone that made his wild accusations sound almost believable. "Your Honor," Drake started, "even if we were to believe that Mrs. Carter was working with the authorities, that does not change the primary issue before us today. She lived under a false identity for her entire marriage. She knowingly deceived her husband about who she really was. This is a profound form of psychological manipulation. A woman who can mislead a man so completely for 5 years is not a fit parent." Vivian's lawyer, a woman named Patricia Webb, stood up. "Your Honor, we would like to call a character witness, Gloria Sinclair, the petitioner's grandmother." Gloria entered the courtroom as if she owned the whole building. She was 78 years old and walked carefully with a cane. She wore a floral dress and her best Sunday church hat. She looked like a grandmother from a classic American painting. The kind of grandmother everyone in the room secretly wished they had. She took the oath and sat in the witness chair, looking as calm as someone who had faced much bigger challenges than a courtroom. Drake, the opposing lawyer, approached her. Mrs. Sinclair, is it not true that your granddaughter lied to her husband about her financial situation for their entire marriage? Gloria shot him a look you might give a child who just tracked mud across a newly mopped floor. Young man, she began, my granddaughter had to watch her first fiancé steal $2 million from her and run away to Costa Rica. She watched every man she dated become obsessed with her fortune the moment they found out she had money. One of those men stole from her. Another one sold her private information to a gossip magazine. A third man proposed after only 2 weeks and was already asking about a joint bank account before the ring was even on her finger. Gloria leaned forward, and her voice was crystal clear. So yes, she hid who she was. She did it hoping to find just one man, only one, who would love the person she was inside, not the numbers in her bank account. That is not deception, counselor. That is called self-preservation. And if you cannot tell the difference, then I feel very sorry for your wife. A low murmur of whispers moved through the courtroom. The judge, a woman in her mid-50s named Judge Harrison, pressed her lips together, trying hard not to smile. Drake attempted to argue his point. But the length of time, Mrs. Sinclair, 5 years of lies. Gloria simply tilted her head. 5 years of making that man his dinner. 5 years of washing his clothes, 5 years of being called stupid and plain while she carried his baby, 5 years of watching him spend her own money on another woman. And you have the audacity to lecture me about lying? My granddaughter is not the one who was dishonest in this marriage, counselor. She is the one who was deceived by the man she thought she had married. Judge Harrison gave her ruling 40 minutes later. The request for custody has been denied. This court finds no evidence that Mrs. Sinclair Carter is an unfit mother. The countersuit is dismissed with prejudice. The claim of entrapment has no merit, given the documented cooperation with federal authorities. Furthermore, the court notes that the respondent, Mr. Mallory, is currently facing federal charges that include forging his wife's signature on a loan. This court finds his claims of being a victim to be extremely unbelievable. In the hallway a few moments later, Vivian hugged Ruth so tightly they almost fell over. Gloria gently patted her on the back and said, "Now can we please go get some lunch? Seeking justice makes a person very hungry." That night, Vivian slept for a full 12 hours without waking up even once. It was the deepest sleep she had gotten in many, many years. She dreamed of her father. He was in his workshop, leaning over an engine, when he looked up and gave her a warm smile. "You did great, Vivi. Now go on and get some rest." For the first time in 5 long years, she woke up feeling like a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders. The threat to her child was finally over. The government had a solid, undeniable case against Preston. The story in the news was starting to change as more details of his cruel behavior came out. Ruth was staying the night. Gloria had driven all the way from Ohio and was settled in the guest room. She had placed her cast iron skillet on the nightstand because, as she put it, you can never be too careful. By 10 o'clock that night, the house was peaceful and quiet. Ruth was sound asleep in her room down the hall. Gloria was snoring gently in the room across from hers. Vivian was sitting up in bed, one hand resting on her stomach, reading a book about sleep schedules for newborns. The whole idea felt wonderfully hopeful, especially since she had not had a good night's sleep since the 1990s. At 3 in the morning, a noise jolted her awake. It was a faint sound, like a door closing somewhere on the first floor. Then came the quiet scuff of shoes on the hardwood floor. Then the unmistakable creak of the third step on the stairs, the one she kept meaning to get fixed. There was someone in her house. Vivian's hand shot out for her phone on the bedside table. Her other hand moved to protect her belly. The baby shifted inside of her, then became still, as if it was listening too. She dialed the number for the security company. The call connected, but she heard no ringing. The line was completely dead. It had been cut. Whoever was inside her house had disabled the phones. She grabbed the special secure phone and quickly sent a text to Ruth. "Someone is downstairs. Call 911. Do not leave your room." And then she heard his voice. Vivian! It was absolutely Preston. She would know that voice anywhere, even in a storm. But it sounded different now. It was no longer the smooth and controlled voice she remembered. This one was rough, broken, and completely unstable. She could hear him moving around downstairs, walking through the living room and into the kitchen. Then his footsteps stopped. She heard the tones of the keypad for the secret room. An incorrect code was entered, then another. This was followed by the heavy thud of a body crashing against the door, a shoulder slamming into it with the full force of a desperate man. The door splintered and crashed open. Vivian heard him step into the room. She could hear the exact moment he saw the monitors, the papers, the entire wall of evidence. She heard a strange sound that was half a laugh and half a sob. Then she heard his footsteps on the stairs. They were slow and heavy, and they were coming closer. He appeared in the doorway of her bedroom. His eyes looked wild, and his hair was a complete mess. He smelled strongly of bourbon. He was wearing a wrinkled shirt and jeans, probably the same clothes he had on earlier. His lawyer must have pulled some strings to get him released on bail. 5 years, Preston said, his voice shaking. For 5 years, you watched me like I was some kind of rat in an experiment. You knew everything. You knew about every meeting, every business trip, every single lie. You just sat there in your little apron and you watched me. Preston, you need to leave now. You are violating the conditions of your bail. The police have been called and they are on their way. You are the one who made me this way, he snarled. His hands were clenched into hard fists. I was a good man before you. You are the one who turned me into a monster. You dangled all that money in front of me, and then you judged me for wanting it. This is all your fault, Vivian, every single bit of it. He took one step into the room. Vivian scrambled back against the headboard, her hand pressed against her stomach. Eleanor gave a swift, hard kick, as if she was trying to push the danger away. I am giving you one chance, Preston. Turn around and walk out of that door. Go back to your lawyer. This does not have to get any worse. Worse? Preston let out a hollow, terrible laugh. How could it possibly get any worse? You have ruined my reputation. You have stolen my company. You have taken my freedom. You have made me a joke to the entire world. What else is there for me to lose? From the hallway, a voice cut through the tension, sharp and steady. Your dignity, son. But you gave that up a very long time ago. Gloria Sinclair was standing in the doorway. She was a 78-year-old woman, only 5 feet 2 inches tall, and she was wearing a simple bathrobe with pink flowers on it. In her right hand, she held a 12-inch cast-iron skillet at shoulder height. She held it with the easy confidence of a woman who had been handling heavy kitchen tools since before Preston was even born. I am 78 years old, Gloria said as she stepped into the bedroom. I have buried 2 husbands. I lived through the Jim Crow South. I recovered from a hip replacement. I survived the heartbreak of watching my own son die in my arms. Do you really believe for one single second that I am afraid of you? Preston just stared at the small, elderly woman holding the frying pan. For a moment, the rage in his eyes was replaced by something else, maybe confusion or even a trace of shame. Sit down, Gloria commanded. Preston did not sit, but he did take a step back. And that was all the chance she needed. Ruth suddenly appeared behind Gloria, a phone pressed tightly to her ear. Preston, I have 911 on the line. The police are 4 minutes away. You have exactly 240 seconds to decide if you want to add breaking and entering to your list of federal crimes. Those 4 minutes felt like 4 years. Preston just stood in the hallway breathing hard, his fists clenched and unclenched over and over as he stared at Vivian through the open bedroom door. She stared right back, one hand on her belly, refusing to let him see her fear. The first thing they heard were the sirens, followed by flashing lights. Red and blue lights pulsed through the windows like a frantic heartbeat. The police came in through the front door, first 2 officers, then 2 more. They found Preston in the hallway in the exact spot where he had stopped when Gloria spoke to him. He did not put up a fight. All the energy seemed to have drained out of him, leaving behind an empty, defeated man. As they put him in handcuffs and led him down the stairs, he turned his head for one last look. This is not over, Vivian. I will take everything from you. I will even take the baby. You will never be free of me. The door shut. The sirens faded into the night, and the house fell silent. Vivian's body gave out as she slid down the headboard, landing in a heap on the mattress. She drew her knees toward her chest, stopping where her pregnant belly met her legs. A tremor ran through her entire frame. Her friend Ruth draped a soft blanket over her shoulders. Gloria, her grandmother, sat on the bed's edge, placing a comforting hand on Vivian's knee. "It's over now, honey. He is gone, and he cannot harm you again." Vivian's reply was barely audible. "But what if it was my fault? What if I am the reason he became that way?" Gloria paused, letting the weight of the question settle in the quiet room. She squeezed Vivian's knee gently, her voice full of the certainty that comes with a long life. "Listen to me, Vivian Marie. A woman never turns a man cruel. A cruel man simply hides his true nature until he feels safe enough to let it out. You didn't build a monster, sweetheart. You just gave one a comfortable home for a while." This is the story of how Vivian Sinclair took back her life from a man who tried to destroy her, and how she built an empire from the ashes. If you believe in the power of a fresh start, please like this story so it can reach others who need to hear it. And tell us in the comments, do you think public revenge is ever justified, or is it better to just walk away? We would love to hear what you think. When her baby girl was born, even Benedict was overcome with emotion. He was on a video call from London, where it was 2 o'clock in the morning, and he had to remove his glasses to wipe his eyes with an elegant handkerchief. "She is absolutely magnificent, madam," he said with a shaky voice. "Truly magnificent." "Well, of course she is," Gloria sniffled through happy tears. She held the newborn with an ease that spoke of a lifetime of rocking babies to sleep. She is a Sinclair, after all. The weeks that came after were the most peaceful Vivian had ever known. She had moved into Gloria's house in Dayton, the very same home her own father had grown up in. She imagined her dad, Henry, sitting on that porch during summer nights, carving little wooden animals for her. The dogwood trees were in full bloom, and the air smelled of cut grass and new beginnings. Eleanor slept peacefully in a bassinet next to Vivian's bed. She made the soft, gurgling sounds of a baby who feels perfectly safe and loved. It is a sound so pure it can make a woman who has been through the worst believe that everything might actually be okay. One Saturday in May, Ruth stopped by. She came with diapers, a home-cooked meal, and a bottle of sparkling cider. "We have a new life to celebrate," she announced with a smile. The two friends sat together on Gloria's welcoming porch. Eleanor was napping soundly on her mother's chest, her tiny fingers curled around a piece of Vivian's hair. The late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow on everything, making the world feel soft and gentle. "All right," Ruth said, pouring the cider into 2 different glasses she found in Gloria's cupboard. "I want to hear everything. Give me all the news." Vivian took a slow sip. "Preston's sentencing was last month. The judge gave him 8 years in a federal prison. For 5 long years, Preston had convinced Vivian she was worthless. He was a master of manipulation. Neighbors heard his angry shouts through the walls. Waitresses at the diner saw her arrive for work each day, trying to hide her swollen, tear-stained eyes. He had systematically dismantled her confidence until there was almost nothing left. She had become someone who accepted terrible treatment from a man who saw her as an object. But he had made one mistake. He never managed to extinguish the final ember of her spirit. Vivian's plan for justice was straightforward, yet it was the boldest thing she had ever done. She organized a grand charity gala, an evening where the entire city would be present. For months, she replayed that one perfect moment in her mind. She imagined the deep satisfaction of seeing Preston's carefully built world crumble around him. And when the time finally arrived, the reality was even better than she had dreamed. She watched the polite, charming mask he wore finally crack and fall away. She saw the shock on people's faces as they finally saw the monster she had been living with. In that single instant, the false story he had told everyone shattered, and the truth came rushing out. After that night, there was no escape for him. His attorneys tried to negotiate a plea, but the judge was unmoved. Preston was sentenced without the possibility of parole for 5 years. An earlier bail violation added another 18 months to his time. As for the business they had shared, Carter Ventures was completely dissolved. Every last asset was absorbed by Vivian's own company, Aurora. Her trusted advisor, Benedict, oversaw the entire transfer. The Carter name was scrubbed from every building and every document, as if it had never existed at all. A while later, Ruth mentioned that Tiffany, the other woman in the affair, had given birth to a son named James. She had accepted a deal for 6 months of probation and 200 hours of community service. "How do you feel about that?" Ruth asked carefully. Vivian watched a robin hopping on the green grass. After a long silence, she answered, "I set up an anonymous trust fund for the boy." Ruth was speechless. Vivian explained, "That child had no say in who his parents were, Ruth. He deserves a fair chance at life, not one defined by their mistakes." But Vivian learned something surprising about getting justice. It does not feel the way you expect. The thrill of her successful revenge faded within a few hours. It was replaced with a bone-deep exhaustion and the enormous task of putting a life back together. What truly healed her was much quieter than a public victory. It was the simple peace of sitting on a porch in Ohio, surrounded by her best friend, her grandmother, and her new daughter. It was the sound of birds in the trees and the warmth of the sun on her face, knowing she was loved by the people who truly mattered. 6 months later, Vivian was standing on a small stage in a Dayton community center. The room was filled with women who were survivors, just like her. She looked into their faces and took a calming breath. "I am not standing here today as a wealthy businesswoman," she began. "I am here as a woman who stayed with the wrong person for far too long." She told them that even with all her resources, the decision to leave was the most difficult one she had ever made. "And that is why I have created this foundation," she announced. It was designed to provide free legal aid, safe housing, career training, and childcare, ensuring that when a woman chose to leave, she had a real future to walk toward. When she stepped down from the stage, her daughter Eleanor held up her little arms. Vivian lifted the child into a warm embrace. Her grandmother, Gloria, approached them in her wheelchair. "My dear girl," Gloria said, her voice thick with emotion, "your father would be so incredibly proud of the woman you have become." At that moment, Vivian's phone buzzed with a message from Benedict in London. It read, "The acquisition in Paris is finalized. The board extends its congratulations. On another note, your grandmother telephoned me to request a supply of British tea biscuits, the chocolate-covered variety. Should I authorize this?" Vivian smiled and texted back, "Authorize it immediately. Do not keep her waiting. She owns a skillet." She walked out into the crisp October sunlight with Eleanor in her arms and her family by her side. She had been lost for a long time, but she had finally found her way back to herself. She was not a casualty, and she was not an avenger. She was a mother, a daughter, and a friend. She was a woman who finally knew her own worth, and she was 100% correct. Thank you for listening to our story. We hope it serves as a reminder that every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. We hope you will join us for our next story.